Welcome to Through the Fire with Angelina Paul, a space where every story matters, every voice is honored, and no journey is left untold. Let's journey together through the flames, uncovering the beauty of redemption, restoration, and the unbreakable human spirit. So welcome to Through the Fire with Angelina Paul. Today we have Taylor in the studio and I am super excited to share your story. So Taylor, one of the things that I do this with all my episodes, and I think I alluded to it a little bit when we were talking, is I always share with all the guests what was left within me when we had I'll call it our prep interview, right? Okay. So there's always, there's a lot of profound awarenesses that have come during those conversations. And I wish I would record them because there's always stuff in there that never makes it to the podcast. But I'm a very spiritual person and I believe that some of those things are just meant for me. And one of the things that I truly, truly felt, and I shared this with you earlier, is that I typically come to the podcast with a lineup of questions because I do want to have a little bit of structure and to share with you what is the essence of the story that we're trying to bring about. But I feel today, after I spoke with you, there was such an ease and a freedom of expression that I felt that I've never felt before. I've always seen myself as someone who's really vocal. I say my piece, I say my mind, but there was another level or another layer that was opened up yesterday in talking with you, where today I said, forget the questions. We are just going to flow. And in doing that, I want you to begin where you feel we should start. Where in your story would you say is the point that you would want to introduce yourself maybe?
Yeah, wow. Putting me on the spot. So as you said, my name is Taylor. I'm a mom of 3. I am in recovery from drugs and alcohol.
Yeah.
I am on a healing journey, as so many of us are.
Yes.
As you know, my life was not always as free and full of light as it is today.
Yeah.
There were some very, very dark points in my journey.
Yeah.
At the worst of it, I had lost custody of my children. I was homeless. I was selling my body for money to support my habits. I was stealing. I was getting arrested, like just all sorts of crazy things. So I think I just truly believe in the power of change, and when somebody sees a little light in you, how far it can really take you.
Wow, that's amazing. When you listen to most podcasts, we kind of leave the advice till the end, where it's like, okay, what would you advise someone? At the end, people always ask those type of questions. What would you tell your younger self and things like that? These are the general, podcast wrap-up questions. But I want to ask you right at the beginning, because I feel like what you've gone through and the wisdom that you've gathered, I want someone to be able to get it within these first few minutes of them listening to this podcast. You talk to me a lot about the guilt and the shame that comes about when you are now stepping into that healing as someone recovering from drugs and alcohol. Can you tell me, what would you say to someone right now who is struggling with that guilt and shame, that even though they have a lot of people in front of them that want to help them, that are pulling them up, that are saying all the right things, but that voice still says, you're not worthy, you don't deserve this, how dare you want a second chance? Who do you think you are to have wasted time and life and impacted all these people's lives in a negative way and think that you deserve a second chance? What would you say to that person that can allow them to take the gift of healing and a new path today?
Yeah, wow, that's such a deep question. What would I say? I think I would just acknowledge that in order to kind of move forward, you truly do have to come to a place of self-forgiveness.
Right.
I think acknowledging that the choices made in addiction and when somebody's in that active use, it was never my intention. And I know everyone that I know who's struggled with addiction, it was never their intention to hurt the people they love.
Yeah.
I think when you get so wrapped up in drugs and alcohol, you're just at such a low place in your own life and you have no self-worth. You don't love yourself. And like you said, you don't think you're deserving.
Yeah.
So I think the first step to really overcoming that is just beginning to honor and love yourself where you're at.
Right.
And knowing that we all do the best we can with what we have, no matter what that looks like.
Yeah. What was self-forgiveness like for you?
Yeah, it's still a journey.
What are the things that you felt you needed to forgive yourself for?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing to forgive myself for was for not being the mother that I knew I always should be and that I could be.
Right.
I had a lot of inner healing that I needed to do. I had my first when I was 18,
Right.
And I was very lost at the time. So, yeah, I think the biggest thing is just forgiving myself for allowing like my choices to impact my kids' lives.
Right. When you thought about forgiveness, self-forgiveness is an incredible thing. And I think a lot of us, we can give people a gajillion chances to hurt us, but never give ourselves a chance. And so self-forgiveness, I agree with you. It's such a huge thing in starting any journey where you really are starting to take care of yourself and seeing yourself in a different light. I want to know from you as a mother, since being the mother that you knew you are, is one of the things that you started with in your forgiveness journey. Did that require your children to forgive you? Or did you ever ask your children for forgiveness? Or is it something that you desire from them?
Yeah, I think yes and no. I truly don't feel that we need other people's forgiveness in order to forgive ourselves. My oldest is 10 now, so he remembers and witnessed quite a lot through my addiction.
Right.
He knows that his words are, "You left me and I'll always remember that," right?
Yeah.
From his perspective, he doesn't totally understand the ins and outs of addiction and why I wasn't able to be around him. He just feels that I left him.
Right. So you felt all he's really remembering is the abandonment and the rejection.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. And it's something he brings up quite often. And in those moments, we just kind of talk about it. And I explain.
What do you say? What does talk about sound like? Like, what are you saying at this point to him?
Yeah. So generally starts with I love you. I'm sorry. Right. It was never my intention to not be able to be a mother to you.
Right.
At that point in my life, I was very broken and I didn't know who I was and I didn't know how to be your mother.
Right.
I was making very unsafe choices. He knows a little bit about drugs and alcohol. So,
right.
I say, I was drinking too much, and some people, when they drink, they can't stop.
Yeah. Same
with drugs. Some people, once they start, they don't stop. And I just wasn't in a place that I could properly take care of you.
Yeah.
And that's kind of as far as the conversation goes. He doesn't.
And so what are some of his responses? Do you think that you are getting through or at least planting a seed within him that will give him some information when he considers what you are saying?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the honesty and just not shutting the door on that conversation has been such a huge help.
Right.
When he was first back in my life, I didn't even know how to handle that conversation.
Yeah.
I would just get angry, right?
Yeah.
It was still such an open wound on my own that I couldn't find words to respond to it in a kind and loving way. So I would just kind of close the door on it. And then I would see it in him, right? Like he would be emotional and triggered and angry with me. I think the more I've allowed for that open dialogue and just let him know that his feelings are totally valid.
Yeah.
Like, you are right, I did leave you.
Yeah.
Like I wasn't able to be your mother. I think it's brought a lot of healing to both of us.
Yeah, I think so too. I think that it does. As parents, I've seen it in my own parenting, and I think it's something that I still challenge to this day. It's very difficult when our children, even the parents that think they have done an awesome job, they were there all the time, when your child expresses to you the gaps, it's very difficult to not be angry and defensive. Because you are thinking, I'm doing the best that I can. Or even when you weren't there, you feel like your reasons are so valid enough that I shouldn't even be asked this question, right? So I appreciate that you are doing that. And I'm hoping that even the people that are listening who have walked the same path as yourself can see that there is an opportunity to heal alongside our children who may have been impacted by the time that we were not able to show up for them in the best possible way. So let's talk a little bit really now about your story. So I remember you telling me that you grew up in a family where your parents were on the straight and narrow. They were good parents. And I'm thinking of the moment when you were 19 years old where you actually left the home because your parents had found some drugs in the home. I'm wanting to, if you can, even, share anything around this, is how does a 19-year-old living in a good home get connected to a crowd of people that lead them in this path that becomes like this journey that just spiraled out of control for you? How does that happen?
Yeah, absolutely. So we moved from Alberta to Kelowna when I was 14. So I was in grade 9.
Yeah.
I was so angry about having to leave all my friends behind. And I remember hearing that Kelowna was a party town.
Yeah.
And I think at one point I told my parents, if you make me move, I will start using drugs.
Oh, you actually said that?
And my dad was like, Taylor, go for it. If that's what you want to do with your life, absolutely. Like, sure.
Yeah, but we're moving.
Yeah. Like, this is what we're doing. Kelowna's beautiful. This is where we want to be. So fast forward, I did get involved in the wrong crowd from like a fairly young age.
Is this people you met at school or?
Yeah. So, yeah. I definitely got involved with a lot of drinking and substance use in high school.
Right. So where are high school students finding the substance? Because I know even we have cannabis that's now legalized. It wasn't legal then.
Yeah.
So where's the supply coming from at school?
I think...
Who's bringing in the contraband?
Absolutely. Nobody should be. I think we were probably just getting it from older siblings.
Yeah. The ones who can access it.
Yeah. And then just kind of connect that way, right? And I mean, when you're 16, you don't always look like you're 16 if you put on enough makeup and wear...
clothes that make you look a bit more mature.
Right?
Yeah,
so then you're meeting people and lying about your age and just kind of getting involved in that kind of way.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was quite fascinating for me because a lot of people that talk about having fallen into drug use, there's always this story behind where the parent did something wrong. They didn't acknowledge this. They didn't that. But what was fascinating about your story is you could come up from a really, really good home. And you could just end up with the wrong crowd. And that can just send your life in a completely, it's like two different worlds, how you were raised and how you're showing up in the world, right? So you meet these friends and you're hanging out and the drug use has started. At that point, are you doing hard drugs in school or is it just marijuana?
No, it was hard drugs. I think I started using cocaine when I was 16.
Wow.
So on and off, and then it just progressed.
Right.
When I was 19, I was bartending, so quite involved in that lifestyle.
Right.
And just kind of kept falling into worse and worse crowds as I got older.
Yeah. So I told you earlier that for me, being born and raised in Zimbabwe, I actually don't remember someone in my childhood that anyone ever said they're addicted to drugs or anything of that nature. And it's not, I don't believe it for a moment that it wasn't there. I just know that we come from a community that can be very, very good and thorough in painting the picture and throwing some things under. It is a way of preserving community, which I totally do honor. But, there are some problems that unless you bring them to light, people can never learn, and those that are struggling can never really find the help that they need. So when I ask these questions, because I know maybe other people who've gone on this journey will hear me ask and think I'm totally ignorant, but as long as I have you across the table, I'm not going to pretend that I know. So my question is, the first hit of cocaine, what does it do to you? What is the feeling in that moment that makes you say, oh yeah, this thing is going to be my friend for a while? Like the first line, like the only time I've ever seen anyone do cocaine in my life is in a movie.
Okay, fair.
Yeah. So people listening, just, yeah.
Total trigger warning if people do.
Please, I'm not trying to, I just want to understand.
Yeah. I just remember I felt more alive, I guess. When I was younger, I was quite shy. I was quite timid. I had a hard time connecting and meeting people that I didn't know. So when I started drinking and then using cocaine, it was like the part of me that was so scared to interact with people was just gone. Wow. I could let loose. I could be loud. I could be silly. I could stay up all night. And it was like I just became a whole different person.
Wow.
And I mean, it doesn't last long. The fun of drugs does not last long.
Yeah. So that's hence the need to continue to have what you're taking so that that feeling can be continual.
Yeah.
So there's this really fascinating thing about me. Is my life is totally a musical, whether it's by way of music or film. Okay. Whenever someone tells me something, there's something that happens in my brain that goes, either a song will come up associated to what you're saying if I'm really thoroughly engaged, or it could be a movie. When you said, and I just want to tell you this because I think it's funny, but when you said, the parts of me that were a bit timid and a bit reserved, maybe a little introverted, they came out. I saw that movie where Jim Carrey is the mask. Remember when he puts on the mask and he goes, "Somebody stop me."
Absolutely right.
So I just saw that because so many different personalities of him came out. Yeah. And he was this guy who would go to the office and his clients will bully him about giving him loans and stuff like that. And then once you put on the mask. So anyway,
and
just a segue there.
It is almost like that though, right? It's like having those two different personalities.
There's two different personalities. So when you said to your parents, if we move to Kelowna, I would definitely do drugs. Yeah. Did you mean it, or you knew that was the thing that would cause them to stop and think?
I think that's what I was hoping, that they would be like, okay, we won't move. I mean, you can't generally fool your parents. Yeah. So I don't. As a 14-year-old, I don't know. Sorry, mom and dad.
I know. And we will be praying that your children will, because, my parents would always say, you see the stuff that you're doing to me? Your children are...
Right? I know. I can only hope they learn from my mistakes.
Yeah. No, they will. So at 19, your parents find the drugs and then they say, you cannot be here if this is what you want to engage in, and you leave. So you encounter this individual who presents as a family man who is just simply giving you a hand. Yeah. And you accept that. At this point, you have your first son. Yeah. And so you move in with them. And so tell me about the moment that you realized that this wasn't a family man taking care of you. There was something terribly wrong with this individual and what was happening around you.
Yeah. So as we spoke about, one night, I think he had some people over. We were all drinking, having a good time. I wandered downstairs to take a phone call and was met with a girl who was in quite a bit of distress. Yeah. She was hysterical. She was upset. She was crying. She was scared. And she had shared with me that this man had essentially locked her in the basement and wouldn't let her out. Later, I found out he was, I guess, a pimp of sorts that you would say, right?
Yeah. So at that moment, you discover, wow, there's a young lady literally being held hostage in the basement of the home I'm living in with my son. And this man is essentially a pimp. And so when you find this girl, I asked this to you when we were talking, because generally people who haven't been in situations where it's fight or flight, we think that, the common sense we've been told to use will kick in, and we just say, oh, stranger danger, boom, I'm gone.
Yeah.
Right. So for those people who think it's so easy to get away from abusers, or when you discover that something is terribly wrong, you have a choice to immediately leave, I just want to, ask you this question. What in that moment made you not say, hey, girl, you and I, we need to get out right now?
Yeah, so his house was under lock and key. He had cameras all over the place, inside, outside. And I mean, that maybe should have been a sign in the beginning that
but
hey,
you just thought we're being very, very safe.
Right.
Yeah.
And then he had come down, or I went upstairs, and I think we got into a little bit of an altercation because me being young and naive, I was like, this is messed up. Like, you can't be doing this to people. And at this point, he had grabbed me by my throat and pinned me against a wall.
Wow. So physically attacked you and threatened you.
Yeah. And at that point, he was a big man, and I was 19, and I was just scared, right?
Yeah. So what was the threat? If you tell people, or was it you two are not going to be able to leave? What did he say?
I don't even remember what the threat was. I just remember the feeling of being so scared.
So fearful.
And it's just like at that point, it was the realization that the people I was hanging out with were not just having fun, drinking and partying.
Yeah.
It was like that realization that maybe I got myself involved into something a lot deeper and something that I didn't understand.
Right. Yeah. So you realized that there was some sex worker type situation that was going on where he was pimping young women. And definitely that was like one of the things maybe he was using to make money, or whatever the case may be. Yeah. So you realize at that point, when he physically threatens you and attacks you, that you cannot get out of this house just like, you could walk out. How long after this incident are you and this young lady still in this home?
Yeah, I was definitely still a few days. I don't even know what happened to her. Like, I saw her the one time, and that was kind of it. So,
wow. Yeah. So was it like a situation where you were in separate places at that point where you couldn't interact?
Yeah, it was a pretty big house. So.
Yeah. Wow. So there was a lot of partying happening. People were coming and leaving. And so how do you eventually leave this place? So does he make you, actually, before we move there, does he make you also perform sexual acts with people that are coming? So is he asking, or is he demanding? Is he threatening when it's time for you to perform these acts?
Yeah, I think it was probably more of a demand. And then also just being so intoxicated on drugs that... you almost are just out of it and don't even know what's going on at that point. Yeah,
so you were still using, so you were at that point where you didn't even really care or feel, and it was just happening. So how do you end up leaving this place? How do you get out of this? Really, it's an imprisonment. How do you get out of it?
Yeah, so this man was on house arrest or probation, something at the time, and he ended up getting arrested again.
Okay.
Yeah, and that was kind of the end of that. I had got pregnant with my middle not too long after that.
Right.
And then, until recently, I even, that memory hasn't even been in my head until we had the conversation.
Yeah.
So I don't want to call it a super skill because it's not. It's totally a trauma response, but just of shoving everything down and pretending it didn't happen, right?
Yeah.
So I think after that, I had moved back to my parents for a little while until my boyfriend at the time and I had got our own place. I was sober for the 9 months that I was pregnant.
Yeah.
And then started drinking and using again shortly after, unfortunately.
Wow. So your parents, were they always open? Like when you would come, so when you come back, you've left this house where you were being held hostage. You now are pregnant. You show up at the door. How does that conversation go? Is it, I'm back now, I'm going to be sober? Are there promises being made? What makes your parents open the door? What moves them from get out of the house if you're using to you are welcome to come inside the home?
Absolutely. My parents have always been my biggest supporters with me being sober.
Yeah.
I'm sure there was a lot of promises. I had to do drug tests.
Yeah.
I had to pass like a 90-day drug test in order to have unsupervised access with my oldest at the time.
Yeah.
And then also because I was pregnant, they were aware that I wasn't drinking and using, right?
Right. Oh, so yeah, we didn't talk about that amidst this time that you were at this house with your first, your parents had reached out to the father of your first baby and asked him if you could take him. And so the courts were actually involved, and the father of your first son at that time was actually given full custody of your son.
Yeah.
We talked a little bit about that as to how you felt in that moment when you're being told you will no longer have, be the primary caregiver for your son.
Yeah, I remember I was absolutely devastated.
Yeah.
And then there was a part of me that was just angry and didn't understand almost why they were doing it.
Yeah.
Logically, I knew I was not in a good place.
Yeah. Did you think in that moment like they're punishing me or?
Yeah, absolutely. I was angry. I was super angry at my parents. I was angry at my child's dad.
Yeah.
Just angry at everything and everyone, really.
Yeah. So you're back at home, you are expecting your second child, and for the duration of the time that you're pregnant, you are sober. And so we talked about this again where, a lot of women have all these magical and miraculous moments when they have their children, and there's like a turning of the tide that happens. Even to the people like, I'm a goody two shoes, my life has been perfect. That moment still causes them to elevate in some way to what they're going to be in life, what they're going to do. Did these things happen when you had your children?
Yeah, I mean, the moment all of my kids were born were one of the happiest moments of my life.
Yeah.
Just that feeling. And of course, it was never my intention to go back to the drug use.
Yeah.
I wanted to do right by them. I wanted to be the mom that I knew I could be when substances weren't involved.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, my partner at the time was also quite heavily involved with drugs and alcohol. Our relationship was so incredibly toxic.
Yeah.
So the drugs and alcohol were introduced not too long again after my middle was born.
I think you said for your second, it was like 2 months after you had him, you had a night out, which, almost every person that has a kid looks forward to this night.
Absolutely.
The first night without your kid, right?
Yeah.
Because at that moment you realize that, yes, they're fuzzy and cuddly like candy floss and bunnies, but you want your time away from them.
Yeah.
So on that day that you had the time away is the day that you started to use again.
It was, yeah. I mistakenly thought it was a good idea to do shooters the first time drinking after 10 months.
Yeah.
So very quickly was ill.
Yeah. Don't do shooters, people.
Yeah.
Just after
not
you.
Good.
No.
Not good. And my boyfriend at the time's solution was to stop at the dealer's house to sober me up. So.
Yeah. So, and the cocaine was supposed to sober you up from the shooters.
Yes.
Wow. And you were like, yes, this is very, very smart. This is what we're doing.
Oh, I was I was very incapacitated and intoxicated at the moment. So.
Wow. So at this point, the only time of sobriety that you have under your belt is because you're pregnant.
Yeah. Probably from the time about I was 14 until the last 2 years. So.
Wow. So you mentioned going to several rehab facilities somewhere along the lines of this journey. So tell me about a moment that you go to rehab. What has happened mentally? What is the emotion? What are the feelings before you say, okay, I'm going to check myself in?
Yeah, both times before I went to treatment, I had burned every bridge I had. I had nowhere to go. Yeah. And there was just something in me every time that was like, I can't live like this anymore, and I don't want to live like this anymore.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So here in BC, there are facilities that you can just go as long as you're an adult and say, I'm checking myself in. and you just go in? Or because I've heard some stories of people that can't find help, can't get into facilities. So how were you able to access these facilities at that time?
Yeah, it's definitely not easy to access.
Yeah.
So the first treatment center I went to was on the coast, and it was a government-funded one.
Okay.
My mom called and called and called, and it was, I believe you had to call every single day until they had a bed for you.
Yeah.
And then the second time I went to Now Canada, which is local to Kelowna.
Yeah.
And it is also a government-funded program. So it's a really incredible program.
Okay. How long are the programs typically?
Yeah, anywhere from 60 days to 90 days. Sometimes they extend them to 4 months.
Okay.
A lot of treatment centers have aftercare programs. So
Okay.
it'd be second stage housing where it's still sober living, but you have roommates and you still abide by a multitude of rules.
Yeah. So each time you went to rehab, did you stay for the entire time, or they ones that you just said, you know what, if this not working, I'm out?
Yeah, the first time I went to treatment, I stayed for the 90 days. I went back to Kelowna and relapsed probably 4 days later.
Yeah.
The second time that I went to treatment, I was a week away from completing the program, and I ran into somebody who I used to use with at a gas station, and it was kind of it from there.
Oh, wow. So what do you think was the reason why you would reuse after being in this facility? Like, the question I want to ask is, what is the support that you didn't have that maybe we can share for that person who's on this journey? It seems to me that when you come out, there has to be something else there in that gap, or else you're most likely going to use what was not available for you that made it, near impossible for you to have any sobriety time.
I think the biggest thing was having very, very limited access to my 2 children.
Okay.
I was only allowed to see them for 2 hours twice a week.
Okay.
MCFD was involved at the time, and they have some pretty hardcore rules at times.
Okay.
And to me, it just felt like a battle that I would never be able to get through.
Okay.
And then I think,
so that's the what is that? MC? You said
so it's Ministry of Family and Child Services.
Oh, okay.
So anytime there's like a child welfare issue, they would be called, and then social workers essentially can take your kids if they feel fit, right?
Yeah. So what were some of the real rules that you felt were difficult to follow?
Yeah. I think the supervised visits, it was just a hit on my ego.
Yeah.
They wanted me to have 10 months of sobriety before I was able to have them overnight again. And at the time, 10 months of sobriety seemed like an impossible feat, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. And then I think also just not having like a purpose and not having my own home. I would have been going back to live with my parents. That was like another huge hit to the ego.
Yeah.
So I think it was really just a multitude of things. And then also not feeling that I had like a place where I belonged, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, you mentioned that when we were talking yesterday that you always had felt that you didn't belong. I don't think that's the word you used, but it was about not feeling like you had a place when you were younger. What do you think that was about?
Yeah. I just think that was just a lack of self-worth and confidence in myself that I just didn't have. Looking back, I've always had people in my corner.
Yeah.
But for whatever reason, I would almost isolate myself from that and give myself reasons as to why I couldn't be this person, or I couldn't fit in here, or I didn't belong here.
Yeah. So I want to know about the time that I think you said Christmas Eve or a couple of days before Christmas, you end up homeless. Can you tell me about what happened during that time?
Yeah. So it was I was living in an apartment, and it was a few days before Christmas. I had tried crack cocaine for the first time.
Right.
Within 3 months from that point, I was homeless.
Yeah.
About a month after, I'd reach out to my parents. They were well aware what was going on again.
Yeah.
So they had taken my kids, and it was just kind of a downhill spiral from there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you said you had a car, and so did you start living in your car at that time?
Yeah, I had a car for a short period of time before it got impounded. So I was living in my car. Just kind of in and out of different people's houses.
Yeah. So when the car gets impounded, how are you taking care of yourself, and how are you getting money for the supply?
Yeah. So I was in and out of a woman's shelter for quite some time. I was often getting kicked out of it for drug use. And money-wise, it was using my body to supply myself drugs. Food at the time wasn't a concern. I had lost a lot of weight very, very quickly.
Yeah.
And then taking care of myself, I don't think I would say that I was taking care of myself at all. So.
Okay. Wow. What an incredible journey.
Yeah, it is.
Right? Going through all of this. My mind is thinking about the time that you meet a friend at the beach.
Yeah.
And this friend tells you that they're actually sober because of something you said. Mm-hmm. Tell me about this friend and how you inspired them, even amidst your own continued drug and alcohol use, for them not to go back to it again.
Absolutely, yeah. So she just celebrated her 4-year clean and sober.
Wow, congratulations to your friend.
Yes, amazing. We met in treatment in 2021.
Yeah.
It was her first time in rehab. It was my second time. I think something I shared with her was that I know I can never pick up a drink again.
Yeah.
Even though I used to say that I never had a problem with alcohol and it was always the drugs.
Yeah.
I told her I knew that if I picked up a drink, I would end up using again.
Yeah.
So when we had met at the beach, I think we were just kind of chatting, and she was like, so like, are you sober now? And I was like, well, no, like I still drink. And she was like, what? And I'm like, well, it's fine.
You are the person who said, don't pick up a drink or you end up using.
Yeah, absolutely. So I definitely think that Spirit brought us together that day, because I hadn't seen her in so long. And that was the last day that I had picked up a drink.
Wow. So you saved her life, and she saved yours in that day just by reiterating the very words that you had said. If I know that if I pick up a drink, I'm going to end up using. And I think yesterday you said, in addition to that, you said, and that's not a risk I'm willing to take.
Yeah. Yeah.
Wow. So you've met your friend. This is the last day you stop using. What's the next thing that happens that becomes the pivotal thing in your journey of healing?
Yeah. So about a month after I had drinking, a month after I had stopped drinking again, I had decided I was going to foster dogs.
Okay.
I went to a storage unit to pick up some supplies and met a woman there who she actually owns a local yoga studio in West Kelowna.
Okay.
So we had connected. I was like, oh my God, you teach yoga. And she's like, yeah, come check it out. So I walked into Perfect Balance Yoga Studio. I absolutely fell in love with yoga.
Shout out to Perfect Balance.
Yes,
Yoga Studio in West K. So you walk in there. Had you ever done yoga? Had you ever tried any other modalities of healing?
Yeah, so I had done yoga on and off a few times, but nothing serious, and it was never really anything that I felt drawn to.
Yeah.
At this point, I was kind of just looking for a little bit of quiet from my home life.
Yeah.
3 kids, all being boys, is chaotic and loud and messy.
Yeah.
So yeah, I just kind of happened upon it and fell in love with it. I ended up training with her.
Yeah. So you told me that what she offers, it's trauma directed. Mm-hmm. Can you tell me a little bit about what is trauma directed yoga?
Yeah.
Treatment?
So the studio is a trauma informed studio. So trauma informed is really just the language that we're using around guiding people into different postures, right?
Okay.
Yes, yoga is moving your body into different shapes, but there's also so much more to that. It's like how it feels, the emotions that are brought up, bringing awareness.
Right.
So really just language almost offering instead of telling.
Right.
Starting at like less hard postures and moving into different sensations.
Right.
Yeah.
So you really start attending yoga at the studio and you start seeing a different light in your path.
Yeah.
And I want to know, how do you move from someone who's attending this place, have found a community, you found your sense of belonging, you are now accumulating that time of sobriety under your belt almost effortlessly. How do you move from there to you now want to be that person that stands in the gap for other people? You also do work as a coach. What kind of coach is it?
So recovery coaching.
A recovery coach. So what moves you from just being someone who participates to someone who wants to actually give back?
Yeah, I think it just felt right.
Yeah.
There was such a push that I needed to do it.
Yeah.
When I was attending these yoga classes, it was the first time that I felt safe in my body. It was the first time I was given choice over my body.
Yeah.
Like the first time I realized how elevated my nervous system was constantly.
Yeah.
And learned tools just through breath to settle it and bring it back to a state of balance. So,
wow.
Yeah.
What are some of the things that a recovery coach does for a person that is struggling with addiction?
So I'm in the process of completing a 12-week online program.
Right.
So each week has a different lesson, either a meditation or a 30-minute, 2-hour-long yoga sequence, workshops to go with it, worksheets, and then really just kind of bridging that gap and offering that support that's so hard to find sometimes.
Right. So do you think that people that have gone through the same journey that you've gone through can also find the same help that you found through this trauma-directed yoga that you attended?
Yeah, I absolutely think so. I've seen yoga and Reiki and other healing modalities work in such incredible ways in so many people's lives.
Right. So I want to just talk here as we wrap up around the conversations that you have with your children. Because when we go through things as parents, we often forget that our children are also going through with us. What are some of the things that you have put in place, whether it's just, you and your children, or as you serve as a coach? What are the things that you are doing to ensure that your children don't bear this trauma and end up also having these issues where their nervous system is shut because they're trying to figure it out by themselves? What are some of the things that you're doing to help your children with the trauma that they have experienced when you were using?
So a big one is just having that open dialogue in our home.
Right.
I think my kids know that they can always come to me with anything, no matter what it is. We have so much support in the community as well through different therapies and things like that. So it's been really good in that sense.
Okay. So you take your children to have some therapy around that, so that you can have help with guiding them through this process. So I have to ask you this, because I know that at my height of rebellion, when I would feel like I finally found my path, one of the things that lingered was the fear that I'm gonna go back to that. And mine was more fueled by the faces of the people around me. Though they were supportive, there was this little thing that I felt as though someone is just waiting for me to slip up again. Do you have that kind of fear?
Yes and no. I think it's subsided a lot.
Yeah.
I do 100% have those people in my lives too who are just kind of waiting.
Yeah.
But I just choose not to give my energy to it. I think that if I focus on relapse or focus on the fear of relapse, that I'm more likely to kind of go down that path.
Right.
But when I choose to focus on all the good that I have in my life and all the good that, such a hard journey, yes, but it has brought me to this beautiful place of recovery and light and love and like a life that I never knew was possible, truly.
Right. So definitely not your healing is not motivated by fear, but it's inspired by love.
Yeah.
That is truly, truly awesome. So in sharing your story, in your own words, what is it that you are hoping that your story will do for people that have walked the same path or are still struggling with addiction? What is it that you're hoping that your story will do?
Yeah. My hope is that it can even make one person feel less alone.
Yeah.
And truly know that no matter how bad it has gotten or how many horrible things or wrongdoings a person has done, that they can always come back from it. There's always a chance at redemption and a chance to change your life.
Yeah. And is there anything that I didn't ask you today that if we closed off this podcast and you didn't say it, you would feel like, no, I did not. No, Angelina, no, just no. I need to say this. Is there anything that you would like to say pertaining to this journey, your life, where you're at, anything that I haven't asked you today?
I don't think so. I just truly thank you for giving me an opportunity to share my story.
Thank you. Thank you for coming and sharing. So I just want one line of wisdom that you can give to the world. Being someone who has gone through a vicious fire and a powerful enemy, and you have conquered, you have overcome.
Yeah, love and compassion always win.
Love and compassion always win. Thank you, Taylor.